Hi, Les Jerome again. Um, I need reviews on my book, Wallia's Quest: A Goth's Fight for Freedom in the Roman World. I'm told reviews are the key to being able to sell books, and so if you bought the book, please give me a review. The one piece of information I've gotten from people already is that it's difficult to follow the names. That's why I included the family trees in the book, because it's really incredibly important when you look at the Goths to understand that they were all based on, their society was based on familial connections. And so I sort of had to start with 5 families and the relationships between them, and so that's why I did that. But once you get through that, it actually is a fairly easy story to follow, and the number 5 gets down to 3 pretty quickly, and then it makes it a lot easier to follow. Enough about that. The other thing I've learned about selling books is that you got to have a small animal. This little cutie is named Peanut, and she is our new little miniature dachshund. And she's quite energetic, and she has one of 2 modes we've learned. The first one is that she's sleepy and pretty docile. The other one is she's running, and she has what we call little wiener energy, LWE. We experience a lot of LWE around here these days. But that's not what I want to talk about today, although I love Peanut greatly. I want to talk a little bit about what's in The Last Commando, because we're living through some of that right now. In that book, I discussed what an authoritarian takeover of the United States looked like. So far, Trump seems to be playing this according to what I wrote about a similar character in that book. However, there are still 2 major guardrails. The first is what's called the Insurrection Act of 1807. Under this very old law, which has been updated several times since 1807, the president can deploy the military to the states under a limited set of circumstances. In the times that we've seen the president federalize the National Guard or send in active duty soldiers, it's been used based on the Insurrection Act, usually when states decide not to follow court orders, and that's happened several times in our lifetime. Most notably when it's come to implementing court orders based on desegregation. And that happened several times when I was a kid. The second guardrail, which I talked about a little bit before, is the Posse Comitatus Act. This law, which was passed after Reconstruction, was written to prevent the military from taking a law enforcement role, as it had done in about 11 or 12 years after the end of the Civil War. In my novel, The Last Commando, I came to the conclusion that the Posse Comitatus Act was the big tell. If it stays in effect, the military is probably not going to obey orders to take a law enforcement role. Sure, they'll guard federal facilities and stuff like that, but they won't become a quasi-law enforcement agency. But if they get into enforcing the law as a law enforcement agency, they violate their oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution, because the law says that they can't do that. I think it'll be very, very unlikely that Trump will try to change the oath that officers swear to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution, because it is also enshrined in law. And doing that would result in these officers violating their current oath, which makes them violate the law. So I don't see that happening. It's sort of ironic to me that the Posse Comitatus Act, which was enacted as part of the ending of Reconstruction, essentially prevented the federal government from interfering in as the southern states enacted laws to suppress the African Americans by preventing them from voting, and cementing their status as inferiors relative to white Americans. So I find it ironic that our greatest defense against tyranny right now is a law that was enacted basically to make tyranny possible. My guess is that Congress won't repeal the Posse Comitatus Act, nor will the Supreme Court rule that it's unconstitutional. As I said in the last commando, the memories of Reconstruction are deeply ingrained in the Southern psyche, and I just don't think that the Congress is ever going to change the law to allow that. All that said, the generals are still in a horrible position. I'd love to be a fly on the wall in this now Trump Hegseth meeting with generals and senior enlisted advisors this week. I think personally that there'll be several objectives. As part of Trump's America First agenda, this administration is actively trying to limit U.S. engagement overseas. This may or may not be appropriate. And whether it is appropriate, it's going to depend on what happens afterward. After we disengaged after World War I, we ended up with World War II. As is always the case, however, the circumstances now are different than they were then. Although retrenching when you are the world's largest empire, which the United States really is always dangerous as other actors try to move in to fill the void. That said, disengaging from our overseas commitments mostly in the president's prerogative, although there are some laws on the books that particularly pertaining to NATO that will make this a little bit difficult. I did find it interesting that when the president recently changed direction on Russia because he's very frustrated with them not working with him to end the war in Ukraine, he made a point of saying that NATO and the Europeans could work with the Ukraine to reclaim all of its lost territory. He didn't mention the United States helping in that effort, although later on when he was pressed, he said we might provide some weaponry. The second objective, I think, is to lecture the generals on the warrior ethos, whatever the hell that is. The generals have spent their entire professional careers in war or preparing for war. Most know far more about this subject than the major with the white nationalist tattoos or the guy who avoided military service because of bone spurs. I'm just saying. A third objective might be, and I think probably is, to assess the loyalty of the generals. Some will be more amenable to bending the law than others. However, I don't think are going to violate their oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States to do that. That said, I do think that mass firings and reorganizations might be on the way. Most of this also in the president's prerogative. Another interesting twist in this whole meeting saga is that Trump has now decided to participate himself. He tried to spin this as a session to tell the military how great he's doing and how great they're doing. I don't believe this isn't the entire story. He could have done that with a press release. That said, the Posse Comitatus Act is the major tell here. Trump won't be able to use the military to make himself an autocrat as long as this remains on the books. Despite this, my sources in the military tell me that there's a lot of memorandums for record being written right now as officers document exactly what they're being told to do and by whom to protect themselves from future prosecution. That's going on a bunch right now. Another thing was that we probably aren't going to find out what happened during that meeting anytime soon. Sure, we might get some images and some clips, but we're not going to know what actually happens until the participants tell us. However, they're probably going to be bound by classification. A tell, I think, is going to be the number of resignations and firings that happen after the meeting. If it's a large number, the discussion and topic was probably very controversial. If not, it was probably more mundane. Even if a large number of generals and admirals choose to leave, they aren't going to break the law to tell us what happened. Because if they do, they open themselves up for prosecution. In the last commando, this fictional president eventually finds a way to get around the Posse Comitatus Act. And hopefully Trump won't be able to do the same. I know this is a long post, but I think we're at an inflection point. President Trump has already weaponized the Justice Department to go after his perceived political enemies. I sort of find it interesting that he chose Jim Comey as his first target. After all, it was only through Comey's actions in 2016 that Trump became president in the first place. So that's all for now. Thanks for listening. Bye.